I arrived in Exeter around 11 a.m, and what a stunning city it is. So many ancient buildings and history on display everywhere. Those patriarchal bastards really did know how to build stuff, didn't they? I headed for the quay, which is where I was told Carl's next event was taking place. I wanted to get there early this time because I was sick of being late to the party, so I had a good stroll around for half an hour, waited for Carl and Milo to arrive. I didn't realise Milo was already there. Nobody else did either, which is why you'll probably laugh a bit later on when the leftists declare that they've convinced all the hotels and pubs in that area not to serve Carl and his far-right friends. Sadly, they were a bit slow on the uptake there, as Milo had already spent a nice night in a hotel overlooking that beautiful quay. Well, the sun was shining, it was roasting hot, blue sky, it was absolutely gorgeous, and I got myself a nice cold drink, plenty of ice, and had a slow stroll along the quay, having a look out for any activist types. There didn't appear to be any Antifa terrorist types, at least. It is Exeter after all. But of course that means that there's no shortage of the most dangerous leftists of them all. The ones with money, and no shortage of brains either. The good old-fashioned English middle-class leftists. You know the type. These are the ones who you constantly are talking about the wonderful benefits of multiculturalism, meanwhile having never set foot in any place less white than a fucking snowdrop in their lives. Not even to grab a last-minute takeaway when they're running late after taking the X5 to collect Tarquin and Henry from archery practice, or rugger or piano. Damn, these people get up my nose the most. I call them the I know what's best for you brigade. Always quick to shout down any average working-class person with an opinion, using their superior knowledge of morality gleaned from decades of life in their 5-bed detached in the leafiest lanes of English suburbia. The whitest lanes of English suburbia. Exeter Quay was a magnet for them as well, but being ever so respectable, they kept themselves out the way until Carla actually arrived, and then they set about organising themselves quite quickly. Interestingly, in a very hierarchical way, all lined up like lemmings following one conductor, the guy with the red scarf, chosen no doubt specifically just for this event, probably purchased for this event from M&S. We'll get to him shortly. What a jolly lovely gentleman he was too. Isn't it so easy to preach how everyone should be tolerant of things that you never have to tolerate? It was very quiet, pleasant, peaceful, and then the van arrived, and nothing major happened, but everything started to get a little bit more of a buzz. Everyone put their drinks down and paid their bill and left a tip for the waiter, and then set out about pulling signs out of their bags. I watched Carl's team pull up in the van and unload the sound and camera gear. The police watched quite intently too. They were well turned out, they looked the part, and I was glad that everyone else could see them out in number, because I hoped it would set the tone for the event, and maybe it did help keep the disorder to a minimum. Carl had a bit of trouble finding or choosing a spot to set up on, so that probably took 20 minutes or so, and in that time Colonel Redscarf made his move and began to rally his troops, ready to show these far-right buggers that one of the least multicultural cities in England was not about to tolerate intolerance of multiculturalism. Listen to that twice, it does make sense. At least I think it does. Okay, Mr. T, I'll turn it off now. That music just stirs the soul for me. Maybe it's in my blood or something. You just can't beat a bit of marching band music, can you? And it eerily fits the scene here too, accompanying footage of an army of people who can't wait to see this little island sunk into the sea as soon as possible. Actually, I really will have to turn the music off, because you really need to hear what this buffoon was chanting with his lemmings.
genuine left-wing racism. They called Sajid Javid and Uncle Tom. They claim to care about minorities and minority rights, but when a person of colour thinks the wrong way, then they betray them and call them a horrible slur. It's the truth. It's the truth. People say to me, well, they don't even need to think the wrong way. But when I say, no hate, no fear, fascists are not welcome here. No hate, no fear, fascists are not welcome here. No hate, no fear, fascists are not welcome.
I love it. Someone actually started to make a point to them and address them, which you'd think they'd want, as they're here to give voice to their views. And in steps that age-old cure for ideological disagreement with others. The magical chant at the person you disagree with until he can't be heard anymore. I reckon these people must take drugs before they turn up to things like this. I watched them all day. They're either silent or chanting. There is no in-between for these people. Did you notice the red scarf man, who must be sweating his empty scrotum off, because I was sweating in a fucking t-shirt, drinking one ice-cold drink after another. He was, I do believe, inciting violence. How would that go down at next Tuesday's dinner party in his manicured Japanese walk garden? Violence? Me? Yes, mate, you. What do we want? Milkshakes. When do we want them? Now. How can that be anything but an incitement to assault someone with milkshakes? What happens next? Where do we go from here? What do we want? Punches in the face. When do we want them? Now. And what happens when the other side say, yeah, fuck you, okay, pal, come fucking do it. And then we'll show you we got some of that too. It just, don't you see, especially, this man's educated. This man looks like a fucking poetry teacher, but he's educated. I'd put him down as a teacher. He must be able, at least, even if he doesn't think about it, he must be capable of thinking about this stuff the way I'm putting it. As in, if all you do is chant at people, then all the other people will do is chant back at you, and nobody builds any fucking bridges. Nobody knows what the other person thinks either, because you just chant meaningless fucking slogans. If I was in your little gang, and if I had a good argument against Carl's evil opinions, or not even a good one, but maybe just an argument, do you know what I'd actually be doing? I wouldn't be standing there with you purple-haired virtue signallers. I would be hogging Carl's microphone to make a fool out of him and beat the shit out of him intellectually. If I couldn't do that, then I'd probably man up and accept the fact that he may just have opinions which are valid, and I'd have to concede that they need to be listened to and discussed and thought about. The rational thing to do when you can't argue against someone's opinion, but you don't like their opinion, you should be in conflict, and you have to surely want to rectify that conflict, to put yourself at a bit of mental ease and think, right, well then I must just be fucking not thinking this through well enough. I must be able to come up with an argument for this, so I need to give it some real thought. And I would assume a lot of you people must have gone through that process, and you still just turn up and fucking chant about milkshakes. So the only conclusion I can draw is you can't argue with people like Carl, because there isn't an argument against what people like Carl are saying. Not one that will hold up to an even, fair verbal fight. And that's why you won't do it. And I got a clip of you from a few hours later, which is quite relevant right now, so I'll just snip it in.
Don't get drawn into a discussion with him. Don't get drawn into a debate.
You make it sound like they're trying to lure you into some fucking bear trap. And this is the funny thing. It is, isn't it? It is for you. It is the trap of all traps. It's the monolithic danger to you. Discussion. Don't let him draw you into that deadly discussion stuff. Keep shouting. Don't start talking, because if you start talking, your ears will open and you'll start hearing what he's saying, and then we know where that'll lead. You might change your fucking opinions.
No hate, no fear, fascists are not welcome here.
Look at those faces. What a distinctly monocultural protest by such fervent advocates of diversity. There are only two examples of diversity in Exeter right now. One is Carl's supporters, and I know how much that pisses these people off, and the other is that woman with purple hair, which isn't even really considered diverse anymore, since, well, all you have to be in order to qualify for red or purple hair is a white woman who hates white men. And there's no shortage of those around. This is the whitest anti-white supremacy demonstration I think I've ever seen. Celebrating our diverse communities, their little banner says. This is so ridiculous. I can't believe they actually hold that sign up for people to read. You are not a diverse group. You are not from a diverse community. And you do not want any diversity except diversity of colour, because you're so secure in your whiter than white, wonderfully affluent and idyllic corner of the country that you can't see any problems in anything. Because life's just fucking hunky-dory down here. Maybe because it's not multicultural enough. For fuck's sake, if you really meant what you say, if you really want to celebrate diversity, why haven't you moved to, well, just about anywhere else in England? If you love diversity and want to celebrate it, fuck off to Birmingham or Leicester or a million other places where you can have more diversity than you've ever seen, even on your 50-inch TVs. How many grooming gangs are there in Exeter? How many Islamic fundamentalists are there in Exeter? How many schools have Muslim gangs bullying non-Muslims? How many 9/11 celebrations do you see every September? How many areas of Exeter are practising Sharia law on the streets? How many mosques have you got? How many terrorist attacks have you had? I could go on and fucking on. You have zero multiculturalism compared to most of the rest of the country, so shut the fuck up, or put your fucking money where your mouth is, and go live the magical experience that you love to virtue signal about. You middle-class, privileged hypocrites. Oh, and you, purple haze mouth-a-minute gobshite. Go and walk around Bury Park in Luton with your ultra-visible hair exposed to the world and see how much they want to celebrate diversity. If you make it out alive, you'll be back to Exeter in a fucking heartbeat, I can promise you. And you might even just stop screaming about immigration, bring more immigrants, as you were doing all day. Because you will then have actually been fucking near it.
Milo Yiannopoulos, why are you banned from Australia? You're not welcome in Exeter. You're banned from Australia. I'll tell you why. Milo Yiannopoulos was banned from Australia. So, Milo Yiannopoulos.
God above, how many times are you going to fail to pronounce his name? Has that hair dye eaten up a few brain cells or what? It is Yiannopoulos. Yiannopoulos. There's no I between the N and the O. Yiannopoulos. You're doing it all day, love. It was so painful to listen to this odious creature. The pram says it all. Do you think she borrowed it from another female friend of hers, who somehow did manage to attract a mate? I think it symbolises her statement to the world of, I sacrificed my ovaries so I could shout at bad people and change the world instead. And besides, humans are a scourge on the planet, so we should all stop having them. Wear Doc Martens, tattoo your ankles and dye your hair purple. That's the cure. But something caught my eye, as you can tell when I zoomed in there. A little sticker. I couldn't see it, so I zoomed in. Boycott Israeli goods. Now that's interesting. I'd love to discuss this with her, as if, to find out where she sees the distinction between that and what someone like Carl or Tommy Robinson are saying. I mean, she obviously has an issue with something Israel does or has done. I assume she wouldn't say all Jews are bad people, but that the Israeli government has done something so bad that we should boycott their goods in protest. I assume. Like Jews did to Germany when they heard of Hitler's views, sometime early 1930s. Okay, I wouldn't say that this makes her an anti-Semite. Personally, I wouldn't say that, but many would. I wouldn't say that without knowing more about her reasons anyway. Just based on the sticker, I wouldn't call her that, but she would say, in fact she did, that Carl or Tommy Robinson are racist because of some things they say about immigration. Immigration is not a race, by the way. So it's possible to be opposed to immigration or to question immigration without being opposed to any race. But she's doing precisely the same thing. If Carl said boycott Muslim goods because of some, I don't know, terror attack, she would say that's racist. And I could actually sympathise with that viewpoint, as the people who would suffer from a boycott, 99% of the time, not the people who did the act that you're opposed to. The same goes for Jews in Israel. Boycotting their goods will only starve their economy, which means their people, mostly the rich politicians and big business owners, won't suffer half as much. So how come she can brandish a sticker like that, while calling everyone who wants any restriction on immigration a racist, which she was doing? Yet again, lefties speak out of both sides of their mouths. This reminded me of a quote from a very well-known American civil rights activist, Mexican-American civil rights activist called Cesar Chavez. As monuments to this guy, he said, "Preservation of one's own culture does not require contempt or disrespect for other cultures." Isn't that a wonderfully true statement, and eloquent, and so widely accepted when said by a Mexican, or pretty much anybody but a white person? Why isn't it just as relevant and applicable to white people who fear for the death of their own culture due to mass immigration, for instance? Why are white people guilty of hatred somehow, automatically, by fearing for their own demise? Cesar Chavez wasn't. He was a hero. Oh yeah, I remember why. It's because of the inherent racism of the left. Non-whites can say it, but whiteys can't, due to the colour of their skin. At least some leftists have the honesty to give what is pretty much all leftists' real answer to this. The reason whites can't say this is because no one actually cares about white culture, history, heritage, or any of those things that all other smaller minority cultures are parading through the streets at Notting Hill Carnival and in activist demonstrations all over the world, because everyone respects that nowadays, at least, that every culture has a right to exist, and especially the threatened cultures, they should have a particular voice to save their culture. Anyone but white people. And the reason is, white people are supposed to just shut the fuck up and die out. And again, preservation of one's own culture does not require contempt or disrespect for other cultures.
After the 2019 Christchurch mosque shooting, Milo Yiannopoulos condemned the violence, but then went on to write on Facebook that attacks like this happen because the establishment panders to and mollycoddles extremist leftism and barbaric alien religious cultures.
Well said, well spoken.
How dare you, Milo Yiannopoulos, come to Exeter? You're not welcome.
Not welcome here!
Not welcome. In an interview to Cornwall Live in Truro just a few days ago, he said that the attacks on the mosques were a reaction to liberalism left rather than the result of white supremacist far-right politics.
But what issue do you have with what he said? Are you Milo's PR agent or something? All you've done is republished things he has said, without any commentary, other than to call him names like disgusting or far-right. Those are not arguments, those are not comments even. They're just feelings. You've written all those notes. You came here with speeches and statements prepared. You'd think you could pronounce the fucker's name by now, but the only people you will address with your words, you put all this effort into writing, are the brain-dead bunch of whiteys who are all on your side already. You're literally preaching to the fucking choir. It's exactly what you're doing. You are only talking to people who nod like fucking Churchill insurance dog at you. Milo Yiannopoulos, you're far right. Oh yes. Milo Yiannopoulos, you're racist. Oh yes. Milo Yiannopoulos, you're not welcome here. Oh no, no, no. You could have walked 10 fucking paces and said this straight into Milo's face. But that's too risky, isn't it? Because the first thing he would say to you is exactly what goes through my mind when I'm listening to you. Which goes something like, and what's your fucking point? What is wrong with what he said, in your opinion? If you don't tell anyone, then it sounds suspiciously like you haven't even got a clue what you think's wrong with it. You just hate him for saying it, don't you? Well, thankfully, Purple Haze took a short break from the microphone and making my ears bleed, and Mr. Socialist Scarf took back control of the rabble with a stirring speech he'd prepared.
Yesterday in Devon, there was a wonderful reunion that took place. My 96-year-old father-in-law, whose name is Tom, he's got a craggy face, he's got a hoarse voice, but his mind is as clear as a bell. My father-in-law, Tom, met up with his cousin Steffi, who's aged 93. They hadn't seen each other for years. They sat together in a sunny Devon garden underneath the wisteria, and they chatted, and they yarned.
I won't bore you with it, but he goes on to describe a story of how these two reminisced about their wartime experiences, all obviously proof that we need to shut down free speech because these anti-immigration opinions are somehow indicative that Hitler's back in town in 2019. Without even addressing that ridiculous comparison, doesn't this clip just paint the perfect picture of how out of touch these people are with the realities of immigration and cultural invasion in the UK? Why aren't the leaders, like this guy is clearly a leader of this little group, why aren't these leaders coming from places like Birmingham? Why aren't they coming from towns with a massive Muslim population? Why? Because life ain't so good in those places. They don't want to preserve the status quo in those places. They want to fucking undo it because they're not living under the shade of a fucking wisteria. They're living in a shithole that's getting worse by the day. And you, my friend with the red scarf, haven't probably even seen it once in your life, let alone lived it. Sat in a sunny Devon garden under a wisteria. Jesus, the only time people in Luton probably see a wisteria is when their taxis pay for one to be planted in the garden of one of the new mosques. I wonder, would he be telling this story if it was told by the same elderly people perhaps sat in a terraced house in Moss Side or Sheffield, feeling scared of the gangs around their home radicalising young Muslims and trying to enact Sharia courts on their streets? I got a feeling the subjects of discussion might be quite different, as the view from their window would not be quite so conducive to reminiscing under the shade of a fucking wisteria. A brick, maybe.
If you want to stay in remember the police are allowed to be antagonistic and annoying, not allowed to be violent. That's what the copper said, antagonistic and annoying is fine.
How do you define antagonistic?
You'd have to ask him.
Which one was it? What did he actually say?
He said that, he said, are you allowed to be antagonistic and annoying?
You are allowed to?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, and isn't he pleased as punch about that? I heard him say these exact same words at least 3 or 4 times. It was obvious he was told exactly those words verbatim by one of the police officers. And going by my observations of those officers, their behaviour, their smirks in one direction, dirty looks in the other, and above all their incredible response, or lack of, to the physical assault on Milo, which is coming up shortly, I can well believe it. Taking what he said literally, and in my understanding of the law, or at least what the law used to be like before this hate crime, hurty-feely bullshit we have now, what the officer said is pretty much bang on the truth. You always could be antagonistic or even annoying. Why the hell not? But violence is where you overstep the mark and the law starts to have an issue with you. That's how it used to be. He still seems to think it's the same. But these days it is not like that, is it? Come on, at least it's not for anyone else, for anyone not on the left. And of course we've already seen that violence doesn't seem to be too unacceptable either when it's carried out by the left. On the other hand, and given my particular insight from pretty much studying these coppers like rats in a lab for an entire day, I think I know precisely what they meant when they said it. They were encouraging them to be antagonistic and annoying, which, funnily enough, led them to actually being violent. Yes, I know a copper could easily defend these words they gave him, because literally speaking there is no specific law prohibiting being either of those things. But as we know so well these days, when anyone who feels offended, harassed, distressed, alarmed, or even just says they're upset by something someone said, even just electronically over a fucking internet connection, somebody they'll never meet in their entire lives, people can get arrested and charged. So in a modern society where that sort of stuff is the new culture, should a police officer at a slightly inflamed event, slightly their tempers were high, there was screaming and shouting, people were screaming names at Milo, should they be saying to the people doing the screaming, it's okay to be antagonistic and annoying, a smirk, nudge nudge, wink wink? I don't think they should. I mean, how about Gwent Police put a comment on their Facebook page saying, here's a drug dealer. It's okay to be antagonistic and annoying to him. No, doesn't work, does it? And in case you hadn't heard about it, this is Bad Hair Day drug dealer scumbag Jermaine Taylor, the enemy of a civilised society, licence conditions breached. He's on the run from police. He's wanted. They put a thing on their Facebook page or somewhere online because he might log into Facebook and see that someone's taking the piss out of his hair while he's on the run. Gwent Police think he could be offended. No, they don't even wait for him to be offended. They just threaten that someone could be arrested for it, for saying something that they think he might be offended by. Personally, anyone with that hairdo can't possibly be offended by anyone who comments on it, because it's pretty fucking out there and he could soon shave that shit off. But in this surreal world we live in now, should police be saying it's okay to be antagonistic and annoying at a live demonstration with very angry protesters by the waterside, which concerned me for a little while? Or is that just the rule for when the victim of the antagonism is white men, and they have a different set of rules for someone of a different colour or gender? Going by the evidence of everyday life in the UK, it is a completely rhetorical question, isn't it? And in case anyone's wondering what else they could have said, normally the police response is, you can protest peacefully. That is what they're doing, they're protesting. And so any police advice to any protest group is always, you may peacefully protest. I don't think there was any need to embellish that or maybe incite it with antagonistic and annoying. Like, go get on their tits, lads. That's basically what it was. And we'll see where that led, because it did lead somewhere, I think. Institutional bias, yet again. It might be a different town, but it's the same prejudiced British police. And while most of these protesters were careful about doing anything untoward or illegal, this is Exeter after all, one or two of them just couldn't resist, and they were egging each other on to do something illegal, that is. I spotted one particular idiot working himself up to doing something, and I think everyone else had spotted him too. Carl's team certainly had. And thus began a Benny Hill-style game of kiss chase as he tried to get a clear shot at Carl or Milo, one side of the van to the other, and it went on for at least half an hour.
Now I'm getting taken down. Carry on, Milo. I'm talking about the bad guys in the Second World War.
It's a story.
Oh, well, sorry. We're not. Sorry. Not. I mean the glorious and resplendent religion of peace. Okay, calm down now. Jesus Christ, I'm not even sure where this is going. No, you're all right. You're from a safe country. That's very true. And also,
he's scared of Churchill. He's scared of
say something at Marxists. Something that has meaning, something that has value, that contributes to a public discourse. That's what I'll be doing. Obviously,
I might go get another pint.
but these things have to be talked about. As soon as you become an elected representative, you have the official slowly woke up. So how do you feel like you can best connect with people, like from ethnic minorities? Sorry to interrupt, but look at the little Liberal Democrat in Australia. He's there with a milkshake. He's looking aside. He's moving around.
As you can see, this little Teletubby in the bright yellow jacket is quite proud of what he's doing. He's doesn't seem bothered that he's been spotted, and he's admitted it. Even Carl couldn't miss him, and he was busy talking and trying to manage proceedings. Even he spotted it. So Carl calls him out, and he raises his milkshake with a big smile. In other words, yeah, I'm trying to find an opportunity to assault someone. I'd been following this twerp around for must have been half an hour to an hour, and I was getting fed up. It looked like he was bottling out, if you'll forgive the pun. But as I learned from him later, he was actually pressed for time. That's why he was getting more and more agitated, running from one end of the van to the other, trying to find a slot. He so badly wanted to get his 10 minutes of fame, especially after all the others in the group with more friends had been jeering each other on, and none of them had done it. He wanted to be the one. It was like watching Playground, it really was. And typically, after getting a bit bored, I took a break and went for a quick 5-minute sit down on a bench. And just as I sat down, I heard some jeering from the crowd, and he'd launched his milkshake over Milo and the front of the van and a few other people. and quite a bit on himself too.
Come on. Sorry? Same here. Oh. Another one of our friendly neighbourhood lefties has been very polite and genteel and kind.
Well, my glasses are ruined.
It was the Liberal Democrat who was very angry. Can we get a round of applause for the hero of the Liberal Democrats over there? Bravo for that fantastic argument, sir.
When this incident happened, I was sitting up where the assailant is now, and here's how it looked from my end. Obviously, I knew what he'd done instantly, and I wondered if he might be stupid enough, or arrogant enough, he was both, to believe that I was one of his supporters. So I wandered over to walk with him as he briskly made his way away from the scene. It was quite obvious he was trying to get away without running and making it too obvious that he was shit scared, which he was. And I wanted to see if he'd make a confession, so I could make sure the police couldn't dodge the detection and investigation of yet another criminal assault.
What happened? What happened? Did you get him?
I did it.
Who did you get?
Milo.
You got Milo?
Yeah.
Where are you going? You want to see the damage?
Oh no, you're beating up on me.
I will get beaten up otherwise. Isn't that just so typical of these gutless Marxists? The arrogance and the incredible delusion they suffer from. It is unbelievable. So they commit the only physical assault of the entire day, but they have to flee. Oh, not because they've just done something wrong. No. Not because they fear arrest. No. Because I might get beaten up otherwise. So suddenly you're the fucking victim. You've just assaulted someone. You can see the footage. Has so much as one person shown the slightest inkling of even following him, let alone beating him up? Well, except for me, that is. I followed him, but he feels safe with me. Nobody even tried to detain him, which they were fully entitled to do lawfully. It just shows what this fascist piece of shit is made of. He walks off and flees the scene of his crime, claiming he's got to go because he might get assaulted. just unbelievable. I tried desperately to persuade him to stop walking. I was just trying to get him to stop and have a chat with me, but he was not going to stop walking. So then I just tried to keep him talking to slow his walk down enough that the police, who I stupidly assumed must be on their way to nick him, so they could catch up with us. More fool me.
Well, I've got to Watermail. I'm going canvassing in the afternoon. Not just holding a rally, but actually knocking doors and talking to people.
He's going canvassing. Not just holding a rally, but knocking on doors and actually talking to people. He says that as if it's both bigger and better than what Carl is doing. Carl is trying to talk to people en masse, not on a quiet doorstep where you can pick the locations you go to, pick who you speak to and decide how long you speak to them, based on whether they agree with you or not. No, Carl will take on anybody, publicly, in front of all his detractors and media, and little fuckers with Milkshake like you. But somehow what you're rushing off to do is better. I wonder how many people on their doorsteps would talk to you if you introduce yourself. I wonder if the first thing you say is, hello, I'm a man who's just physically assaulted someone in the street. I've just broken the law and criminally attacked someone. I wonder how long they'd talk to you for. I bet you don't do that. And in case you weren't already aware from his behaviour, and maybe the yellow jacket, he represents the Liberal Democrats. But we'll come back to that shortly.
I was hoping I'd distract security and they'd go for me and then someone else could have a go, but good luck to you.
You did distract them, but did you actually get Milo or not?
Yeah. All over his jacket as well, his fancy, shiny, expensive jacket. I'm very happy with that, but I am going to leave in case they come following after me.
No, hang on a minute. Oh, hang on a minute, mate.
There's a few things to point out here. First and foremost is the beautiful, frank confession, not just of the assault, but of his motives and his pseudo-communist ideological motive, as in all over his nice, fancy, expensive jacket. Rich fucker, he shouldn't have that jacket, so I'm going to ruin it for him. Doesn't this remind you of something from earlier?
He and his tailored suit became the latest target of milkshaking.
Isn't it interesting how these things correlate? The second point is how he talks about how well he had thought this through. showing premeditation, by the way, including his hopes that others were going to attack and how his actions could help them do so. And so he explained how he hoped to distract security long enough to create an opportunity for another assault by someone else. Nice people, these Liberal Democrats, aren't they? So tolerant. You were probably focused on his face when you watched this clip, but watch it again and keep an eye on the background. That's where my eyes were. I was gritting my teeth, hoping a police officer would eventually turn up. And eventually that officer did mosey on down, about as slow as he could get without standing still. I'm convinced the reason he did come over is because he could see from a distance my stern stare, which was my way of making it very clear I was waiting for him to get the fuck over here. You'll notice the milkshaker at one point glanced over his shoulder and then quickly moved to my right as if he was going to disappear. And he was. So just as I said, no, hang on a minute, mate, I actually grabbed his elbow pretty firmly, and that was the point. I think he got the message that something funny was going on, and he may actually have to face up for his actions. No thanks to the police, I might add. So the copper wanders over as if he's wading through treacle, and just as he gets close to us, he perks up and puts on a bit of a show. And he's now committed, isn't he? So he's got to do his job now. But boy, if he could have got out of that. I bet he was seething that I forced the issue. But why didn't he, or any of the 8, 10, God knows how many other officers there, along with their 2 meat wagons, why didn't any of them force the issue? They were around that van where he did the assault, and not one of them did a thing. Nothing.
I just think it's still better. Hello, how you doing?
Do you want to take a seat?
Absolutely.
Smashing. Are you alright?
With the law
Yeah.
fully.
Sorry?
Fully cooperate with the law.
Well, you didn't down there, did you?
What?
You didn't down there, did you?
But at this point.
At
this point.
Oh, right, at this point. What's your name, my friend?
Jonathan Warning.
Jonathan?
Joel.
Oh, J-O... Yep.
E-L.
Yep.
And then T1.
Right, ready?
P-U-N.
Yeah.
W-A. N-I.
What's your date of birth?
13th of April 1999.
You got this gentleman's details? Not yet, right.
No, you want to know.
Well, where do you live?
Up in the university.
Coming over there?
Yeah.
No, I wasn't involved. I followed him because he was making off. No one else was following him, so I persuaded him to wait and answer with the police. What's your name, sir? I don't want to give you my details. What happened? I just heard a big cheer. And he'd been talking about throwing a milkshake, and then he threw the milkshake, and then he told me that he'd got Milo and done what he came here to do, and then he was leaving. So I thought it looks a bit better if he hangs around and deals with the police, apart from being the lawful way to do things.
Right, yeah, that's told my colleague.
I mean, hang on.
It's your first year. You failed. You went to special workshop. This guy's doing that. No, not that. Okay,
Thank you. Thanks.
I'm not sure why, but I got the feeling they were more pissed off with me than the criminal over there. Both officers knew that I had detained him. The first officer saw me do it, and the second one was told by me that I did it. Now, some might question my decision to give no personal details to this officer, which I was not obliged to. Some might say I was an important witness, and indeed I was, but nowhere near as important a witness as the 20 to 30 people minimum, who actually saw the offence take place, or Milo, the actual victim, that they now know was the victim, or Carl, or the Rev, or, and so on. So my rationale was, I don't give out my details unless I have to, and that's my right. And if they had done what they should have, and what I, in all honesty, actually expected them to do after this, i.e. take details from the victim of the crime, and any witnesses to the crime, then I have my footage ready for any court hearing. But before I tell you how that panned out, let's see what the officers say about that, shall we?
Do you think Joel has broken the law? I tell you for a fact, he has. He's committed an assault. I'm not here to take sides, I'm here to try and stop that sort of behaviour. Committed a criminal offence. That's why he's taking these details.
Good luck, Joel. What's in your face? An assault. It's common assault.
It's called on me many times.
Well, you go in the circus, it's still an assault.
Right.
It's a criminal offence. You
Joel,
think that's the way for policies to go?
You're not an offender. You have committed an offence. You go now. You come back. You will be arrested. On your feet, go. Go.
Thank you.
What's your association with Matey Boy?
I was detaining him for you.
Were you? No, you weren't.
There was.
Oh, really?
I really was.
Thank you very much. All right. You a local chap?
Excuse me? How is that the next most relevant question he could have for me? Who the fuck am I? Why is that of so much interest? I wonder. Why not, so what happened, mate? Or, thanks for stopping him for us. These bunions are killing me and I'm just not as fast as I used to be. Or, what did he say to you? What did you see? See, this is another clear giveaway as to what's going through this officer's mind. He wants to know about me. I'm inconsequential here, yet he now has a court case coming up where he'll be required to give his evidence to the Crown Prosecution Service, or at least his bosses, to charge or caution this offender. The first thing he should want from me is any relevant evidence to go with this common assault.
Why was he not arrested?
Because we're here to protest.
When Charlie sees a lovely girl, a girl like yours or mine, he uses a whistle, a wink, and wild root. It gets her every time.
Okay, it isn't fair to pick him up on that, although I wonder if some people might consider that a Freudian slip.
Don't take two of us away. He has been reported. He will be going to court.
He was sort of saying, I got him.
Yeah,
But Milo, he said, but...
Do you notice the body language? Because I did, standing watching it. When he wants information from me, about me, he was standing facing me, very direct and loads of eye contact and all the good stuff, square on and all that. The very second I changed the conversation to what this offender did and said, he instantly turns away and starts ambling off with a, yeah, well, as if to say, well, I ain't interested in that, job done, I'm going now. But the job is not done. Here you have a key witness who is trying to discuss an assault you are reporting someone to court for, and you can't get away quick enough. If you actually look at his eyes here, you can see it. It's so obvious. He's focusing exactly where his mind wants to go.
He will be going to court, and he will be fined for it.
Right.
And the university will be made aware. So,
do you... just trying to think whether he'll just get reported, will he?
It has been reported.
He will go to court?
Yeah, he will go to court.
Yeah. Okay,
yeah.
I might contact, I've got a sheet now, but I might contact and see if I've got any evidence that they might want.
All right,
because he did tell me quite a bit, so...
All right, nice one.
All right.
Thank you for your time.
Cheers.
You can probably tell I was a bit flustered there. I was stuck between finding something to say which might interest this officer enough to stop running away and discuss the actual incident with me, and trying to suss out why he was so keen to get away, and so obviously disinterested in the direct quote of an admission to an offence that I'm trying to tell him about. He clearly didn't want any information about this incident. After all, there's a better chance of it all falling through without a witness, isn't there? Ooh, what a cynic I am. Nope. Again, I'm just a realist. And this is where things really start to piss me off. Whenever an offence takes place, from someone being spat at to someone being murdered, the police are duty-bound under statute to do certain things. And they include a statement from the victim, statements from any witnesses, and a few other things. We support victims of crime. Do you? Apparently not. Unless the victim is on your give a shit about list. Police and Crime Commissioner, Jesus. What a complete waste of taxpayers' money. Yet more bureaucracy that serves zero crime-fighting purposes, but a shitload of political correctness purposes. They produce lovely, fluffy, caring crap like this because, as I said, they have to support the victims of crime in lots of different ways. And it scores a lot of brownie points if one force can be more supportive to victims than the next one. It's just the same game that prick in Plymouth was playing. Look at me, I'm the nicest. Seen it a million times, you see it in every organisation now, but the police are just the gold standard for this shit. And this is the Crime Commissioner's job, basically, at every force, to earn, 73 grand a year playing this game, and playing to win. Hence we get designers spending time and money knocking up logos like this to try and win the game. Here's another one. Hate crime, but only for these groups below. Milo was clearly hated by this assailant, and was definitively assaulted by him, which is a crime. That's the fucking definition of a hate crime then. But back to the victim support duties on the police, and just in case anyone, especially coppers, are thinking that you only have to do these things if you have a victim making a complaint, that's bullshit, and you fucking know it. You have knowledge of an offence taking place. In fact, come to think of it, you must have seen it yourselves, because you dealt with him, you dealt with Joel before I told you what I'd seen. When I was asked by that sergeant for my details, you were already telling Joel what you were fucking going to do with him, because he committed. In fact, the first thing you said when he sat down is that he hadn't obeyed the law. So I think you saw what he did. So no, Milo didn't need to make a complaint for you to act, and that's also proven by the fact that you did take action anyway without Milo complaining, didn't you? Yes, if I'd let him wander off, you no doubt would have dodged that particular bullet, but that's what the big society is all about, isn't it? Stepping up for your community to help the authorities catch offenders. Yeah, fucking thank me later. You heard it yourself. The officers said countless times that this was a crime, a criminal assault. Yet they took no details from anyone. They did not investigate it. They only spoke to him because they held on to him, and they did not gather any evidence. All of these are statutory duties, which they can be sacked for failing to do, by the way, and have been. In the case of bleating special interest groups up and down the country, it happens all the time. I let him finally break free of this annoying chat with the person who caught his fleeing criminal for him, and assumed, yes, I really did assume, that what he told me would come to pass, that Joel would go to court and be fined. What do you think happened? I have a friend who took it upon himself to be my contact with the courts for this, and he contacted them, I don't know, 5 to 10 times since that incident for the next few months. And without getting into detail, no such person has been in a courtroom since, and the courts have no information whatsoever about him. Originally, I got him to contact them to make sure that I would know when the case came through, as I was going to supply my footage to the court. A nice admission, several admissions in fact, proudly stating the damage he occurred on Milo when he assaulted him, and proudly stating how he also hoped to help others do the same. If you wanted to push the boat out, you could even maybe try charging him with common assault and conspiracy. He was part of a group. He was acting in order to help incite more violence to take place. He hoped someone else would do it while he had them distracted. You fucking heard it. But even just a court hearing and a small fine, that would have been plenty. But it didn't happen. Remember Truro? Oh, look at him with his hands around his neck. Look at him beating him up. These people are professional victims. We've got to get better at doing it. As wrong as that is, well, sort of. Depends how far you push it. I don't suggest anyone goes beyond just getting what they're supposed to get under law. Just that would be one huge step up. But we have to start complaining and demanding. We are people too. These laws apply to us too. We paid to build them, most of us. And our ancestors thought them up. So, if anyone should have a right to them, we should. And why don't we? Because we don't bitch enough when we don't get them. We need to start kicking off and saying, hey, why did you deny me my rights? Because it's so easy. Because we are so passive, and we are so keen to be the law-abiding ones, which is a great thing in itself. But we are shooting ourselves in the feet all the time, because we're not just asking to have our rights upheld. We're not asking for any special treatment, just the bare minimum. And unless we start demanding it, they can just keep not giving us it. Because it doesn't bother, it doesn't affect them if we don't complain. This whole case won't come back on this officer unless probably Milo, I mean, I suggest everyone writes to them about this shit, but unless Milo, the actual victim, complains under his right to complain as the victim, the stated victim by this offender's admission, then nothing will happen. So, who is this yellow-bellied little twerp who walked away scot-free after admitting to a criminal assault? This is Joel Punwani, a Liberal Democrat political candidate for Exwick, a region of Exeter. So how well does he fit into the Liberal Democrat Party, I wonder? Well, he obviously doesn't believe in democracy, being such an avid supporter that he appears to have no clothes other than yellow ones. It's like a tribal thing, I think. It's like gang colours. It is the central pillar or aim of the Liberal Democrats in 2019 to undo a democratic referendum which voted for Brexit. I know I'm not on their side, so it sounds like everything I say will just be ideologically opposed to them. That's just not the case. I will openly consider any policy of their party, and I wouldn't be trying to find a reason to put it down. If it was a good policy, it'll be a good policy, and I'm sure they've got some. But really, honestly, that's not the point here. I just want to make this point that I really can't fathom how some of the brighter people running the Lib Dem party have not seen the incredible irony in their name. Why haven't they changed their name? Liberal Democrat? Whilst they seek to undo democracy with every inch of their being, I mean, it's surely verging on mental illness if they can't see how ridiculous this is. They actually managed to convince themselves that they are democratic while attempting to destroy a completely democratic vote just because it didn't go the way they wanted. That is like the antipode of democracy. It is tyranny, for fuck's sake. That's what tyranny means. It means I get my way no matter what. I don't give a fuck what you want. I'm right. And Joel Punwani is obviously very much at home there. And that stands to reason. He believes in assaulting people in the street when they're legally and peacefully speaking in public about views which he doesn't like. These are all tyrants. I'm not sure they all know it. In fact, I genuinely don't think most of them do know it. They just don't ever look introspectively enough to notice. They don't need to look at themselves. Everyone else is the problem. And this is the inherent danger of this modern leftist ideology. I don't mean the leftist policies or anything like that. We can discuss policies. I just mean the entire worldview they have, the whole view that their opinions are morally superior to everybody else's. And that is why they can be so incredibly deluded, so capable of overlooking the irony of being Democrats by name, but not by nature or action. Talk is cheap. Actions are what count, and their actions, and Joel's too, are the opposite of democracy. As I said before, tolerance only exists when you're putting up with something you do not like or do not agree with. That's where tolerance starts. Here's Joel's Twitter page. YIMBY, I had to look that up. It means yes in my backyard. How many immigrants you got there? It's one of these lefty names for people who will put up with things in their backyard when others won't, i.e. another chance to tell the world how morally superior they are. Isn't it funny how the YIMBY types are always in wealthy white areas? It's so easy to say yes in my backyard when it is not in your back fucking yard. It's so easy because you've got no skin in the game. You don't pay for your opinion. It doesn't cost you anything to have that view. Other people pay for it. It's just like the Brexit vote. And this constantly pisses me off. Now, this point is either deliberately dodged or, when it can't be dodged, they do a hatchet job and spin it. To misrepresent it, obviously. What I'm talking about is the obvious fact that the poorest areas with the most immigrants in the UK overwhelmingly voted to leave the EU. And that's not because they are stupid, as they've been called, or didn't know what they were voting for, as has been said, or because they were too old, every other fucking ridiculous insult there is without actually taking account of the fact that they did know what they were voting for and you just don't like the fact they voted for it. It's because they are clever enough to know exactly what they were voting for. The immigration problem is one mainly caused by, Blair in the first place, who fucked the country for centuries, but perpetuated and made even worse by the EU. This shit we get shoved down our necks by people we don't even elect. But they did have a chance to vote out of the EU, and so they did exactly that. Get over it. I've looked at hundreds of examples of this stuff. But just to take one example, Boston in Lincolnshire, an area with huge EU immigration, the biggest, I think. Boston has been dubbed the most European town in Britain. It has the largest number of non-British EU passport holders outside of London. The most European town in the UK, and in fact the whole of Lincolnshire by extension really, it had the highest Brexit vote in the entire country. Is it just a coincidence that it also has the highest number of foreign-born residents? Really? Yeah, just a coincidence? How about Wigan then? Or Oldham? Or Rochdale? The list goes on and on and on. It's just blatantly obvious that the people who actually live with the consequences of this YIMBY shit of the EU, the people who are actually YIMBYs, whether they wanted to be or not, the people whose backyards do have this stuff in, they voted to get it out of their backyard at the first opportunity they have had for decades. And the Liberal Democrat, undemocratic, tyrannical fucking swines want to even undo that and take that one tiny little voice away from them. That one chance to express their wishes. The true downtrodden working class, the ones who used to be represented by the left. That was the purpose of the left. That's why we needed the left, was for the poor, impoverished, people without a voice. And they pop up and give their little voice and all of a sudden it's shut the fuck up. You're wrong. All you lefties have is the votes of the people you bring into our cramped island. And that's why this war is all about how many you can get in. Because you need more and more and more. And we need less and less and less. You need more of them for votes. We need less of them for life. For our culture to survive. For our kids to speak and live our culture and our values, rather than those of the people you choose to replace us with. You oh so fucking tolerant leftists. You're all about power, nothing more, nothing less. And to keep and grow your power, you need immigrants. Because the average British voter doesn't want your dangerous ideas anywhere near them. It's Financial Times. Welcome to the most pro-Brexit town in Britain. Boston and Lincolnshire voted overwhelmingly to leave after 460% rise in immigration. Well, they should be pleased. This stuff's good for them. Haven't you told them enough? They should know by now. This stuff's really good for them. Enriches their culture, makes life better. Why don't they agree? Coincidence? Or are they just so racist in that town? How come that town's suddenly so racist but other towns aren't? Must be the water or something. The excruciating irony here is the fact that the left should care about these people, and it just doesn't anymore. I just think the poor, that's why the poor have moved. That's why the poor are voting for people like Tommy Robinson and coming out and supporting people like that. They're poor people who are hungry, pissed off, and they want a change. And the mainstream is left, so they want non-mainstream, so they want non-left. That's why the poor have finally woken up, or are starting to anyway, and moving to the right, because the left just doesn't give a shit about them anymore, and it wants them to swallow any shit they push down their throats, and any complaints mean you're a racist. No wonder they've left the left. So how did Joel do in the election? It looks to me like racism has had a resounding democratic victory over tyranny there, Joel. Being such a YIMBY, I hope you're happy to tolerate things you don't like in your backyard, like Nazis. Would you be a YIMBY then? The real YIMBYs, the ones who never call themselves that, are the people who live with the fallout of EU decisions on a daily basis. The EU that you and your party want to ensure we remain a part of, even though the country has told you it doesn't. And what am I talking about anyway? Your backyard? You don't even have a backyard, you cretin. You're a student. You've never owned a house. You've probably never even rented one. You've probably got a little windowsill where you grow soy and Teletubby health potions. And even that windowsill isn't paid for by you. Well, I looked into this Joel Pomrani a little bit. I was curious, genuinely, just confused and curious after meeting him. He's got a few documents online. He's published a few papers. He's done an absolutely horrendous YouTube video. I think if you search on YouTube for Joel Pomrani, you might find it. I can't remember what it was about. It's just spun my head. Must be way too high level for me. I had to read some of these documents just to try and understand a bit more about this character. It drives me around the twist to see what, by all accounts, is a pretty damn intelligent human being. And I don't mind saying that, you know, he's a prick, but he's intelligent, but he's behaving like such a moron. He wrote this piece about EU and UN stuff. He has a bit to do with UN type stuff, student level only, of course. The wannabe new leaders to save our poor world from all the evils in it without considering if it might actually be themselves. Here's the ex-MUN, which is Exeter University's Model United Nations Society. Was it the Exeter University Model United Nations Society, as the name suggests, a debating society? Are you shitting me? That operates as a model of the real UN, with the same procedures and a debating style focused on national policy and political knowledge rather than necessarily your own opinions and rhetorical skills. Do they use Milkshake in those debates, I wonder? In our friendly weekly sessions, we'll train you up in the rules of debate used by the UN and give you the opportunity to practice with training debates on everything from... This is just ridiculous. It couldn't be more the opposite of how he behaves. I think we're going to have to email these people. I wonder if the police did. Yeah, they said they did. Should we find out? And what does he say about himself? My name is Joel Penwine. I'm 19 years old. I come from many different places. I have 3 passports. I've lived in 5 countries, and parts of my family come from at least 7 nations. Sounds like a badge of honour, doesn't it? Is it okay to just be from one country, Joel? Or are you better than us because you're more worldly wise? If asked where I'm from, though, my short answer is London, the great city to which I always return. Why do you have a short answer to where you're from? Are you not from anywhere? Is that why you're so misguided and lost? And that's why you think everyone who is from somewhere and likes where they're from as racist? Central African Republic. This fostered a great interest in international relations. You are there to start wars, surely? That's the only way you know how to behave. Relations. Imagine you in the Bay of Pigs. I've gained interest in other aspects of governance and government, you mean, governing, and to work an intern there at the Temple, with the Temple of Understanding. I have to look that up, I think. Oh boy. To work an intern there with the Temple of Understanding, which is an interfaith organisation founded in 1960 by mission. This is what they are all about. 4 things. Foster appreciation of religious and cultural diversity. I want to foster your appreciation of my shit. Doesn't it smell lovely? I need to keep fostering your appreciation of it. Expand public discourse on religion and spirituality. Okay. Promote constructive social change. We all know what that is. Your shit. Further education for global citizenship. Well, you just fit in perfectly, don't you? Because you're from 57 different planets. It's frightening. Isn't education for global citizenship... Right, firstly, we don't want to be citizens of the world necessarily. You might want to be, and which is fine because you can do that. There's aircrafts and you've got a passport. You know, you can be a global citizen if you want. I don't want to be. I like the fact that I'm English, and when I go on holiday to, I don't know, Turkey, I go and experience the rich, vibrant culture of Turkey, and I enjoy it, and I love it, and I make some good friends, and I meet some really interesting people, and I celebrate visiting this different place. That's the diversity for me. It's called a holiday. But then I come back to what I know. Just like you go back to your house and you probably don't like coming home to find all your furniture's been moved around for you. You like things just the way you made them. Reading a bit about this character, what I found such a shame is that all this apparent rationality and eloquence on display. He writes well, he talks shit, but he writes well. He's obviously learnt about reasoning and stuff, so he's got no excuse of ignorance here. And when the chips are down, where are all those skills? He drops them all and becomes a fascist thug. He wouldn't call himself that because he doesn't identify as one, but he fucking behaves like one. So, walks like duck, quacks like duck, duck. What use is all this knowledge and intellect if you can't even abide by the most basic, common decency? Not to mention legality, the stuff everyone is expected to know and follow, people with half your intelligence. You're a little boy with a very solid capacity for intellectual thought. The little boy part comes out when you find your eloquence fails to turn the whole world to your point of view, something all you radical lefties struggle with, becoming at first emotional, then insulting and angry, then criminally violent, then who knows? Your path could lead anywhere that you want it to. You're blessed with privilege, which that green page with the fucking I'm from here and there and everywhere, just reading that, that's a life of privilege, my friend. That is a privileged child. Travelling the world, go and speak to people in fucking Oldham or Sheffield and see what they've seen. They see their job and their home. A little 2-bed terrace and maybe a load of Muslims outside telling them there's a new mosque being built. But you're privileged and you're blessed with a very smart mind, but because of your ideological possession and outright arrogance in your self-righteousness, you're just simply incapable of doing that one most fundamental of things: respect. Respect for those with different opinions to your own. Do you wonder why the average blue-collar working man and woman increasingly distrust the intellectual elites in Parliament? You are a budding demonstration of the reasons. You preach equality and tolerance, yet you practice the very opposite, having complete disdain for those not as cerebrally gifted as you, and for their opinions. Opinions, by the way, which were forged not in books and theoretical class discussions and models and debating societies with other idealistic, spoon-fed fucking privileged teenagers, but in life, on the streets. I'm sure that once you have had another decade or two on this earth, maybe had some children, bought and sold a house or two, lost a few jobs, or been made redundant once or twice, you just might grow up and see the world as a real place, instead of a theoretical laboratory where you can play around and create your own desired realities with a lash of your tongue and a milkshake. The short version is grow up, Joel, before you become even more dangerously intolerant of fellow human beings. And no, you don't get to say, as I know you will, well, those kinds of people aren't humans. That is a dishonest and gutless cop-out from dealing with the difficulty of facing alternative viewpoints and beliefs in a mature and rational way. You claim to be into multi-faith, etc. How about multi-fucking viewpoints? That's a starter, isn't it? If you could be multi-faith, which are pretty big absolutist beliefs, really, why do you have so much trouble dealing with multi-viewpoints? You're not so tolerant there, are you? One day you nutjob lefties will realise that you are just as intolerant as the most right-wing people you despise. You just refuse to tolerate different things. You're no more tolerant, you just tolerate the things you like and refuse to tolerate, or milkshake, the things you don't like. That's the definition of intolerance, and is no different from a real neo-Nazi. Leftism begets fascism. You are living, breathing proof of that fact. And you don't even know it. I bet you got a big career planned. Another Lib Dem in a man from Del Monte suit, preaching from your high horse about how good you are and how everyone who disagrees with you must be the embodiment of evil, as that saves a real debate, doesn't it? And I bet you thought you could keep your little crime on the down low so it doesn't come back to bite you when you're running for a Lib Dem leadership contest in God knows how many years to come. After all, nobody will remember this or remember you for this incident. And even the police, who so nearly managed to avoid applying the law to you, if they drop the whole thing, then there's no record of it. And nobody needs to know a thing about your little escapade into physical assaults on, who was it now? Oh yes, an openly gay man in a public place exercising his legally protected right to express an opinion which differs from yours. That was his crimes. You just listed them all there. I hope it was worth it. One of the things you will learn at some point, and I mean it, will, because you'll have to, because everyone does, is that in the real world, actions have consequences. Try as you might, you won't dodge that little law of life. You might have done up till now, in your sheltered, privileged, fucking taxpayer-subsidised existence. Your behaviour, your refusal to respect a fellow person with a different opinion, your refusal to respect the personal safety and property of another individual, indeed one with protected characteristics, will not go unchallenged. Even if the law gives you a pass in our demonstrably two-tier policing system this time, and will certainly not be forgotten. I will ensure the footage of your crime will be published and republished every time your friends in the left-wing establishment remove it. Every time your head pops up on Twitter with another high and mighty claim to holiness, I'll swoop in with a reminder to anyone who may be following your tripe. that you are no better than the worst of those you despise. The only difference is you believe you are a fucking saint, where most adults quickly learn that such people rarely exist, and when they do, they certainly don't come in the form of a person who attacks people in the street and then boasts about it afterwards. Well done, Joel. I trust you'll soon learn that even your actions will have consequences for you. Just as the great Martin Luther King said, people should be judged by the content of their character, and you've shown everyone yours. So we can now judge you properly. Way to go, Councillor Pumwani. Well, thankfully, there weren't any more physical assaults, unless you include bleeding eardrums as an assault. The event wound up. Carl donned his Make Britain Great Again hat. Actually, he could save money and just get a hat that says Trigger on the front. He did a few interviews here and there, and then everyone gradually dispersed with a plan to meet at the Exeter Wetherspoons pub. I took a good hour to find my way to the pub, as I was honestly just breathtaken by the beauty of that city of Exeter. I went round the cathedral grounds, down a few side streets at random, just looking at the ancient buildings dotted here, there and everywhere, and then I finally circled back around to the street behind the cathedral, where the pub was, to have a drink or two with Carl's entourage. I was actually about ready to go home, as the sun had taken its toll on me, but I had decided actually in Truro that my contribution to the great strides of real progress being made by people like Carl and Milo, and the people who helped them do it, my contribution would be to just buy a few drinks for the very dedicated and hard-working team which make these events possible. So I found the Wetherspoons, grabbed a cold drink, grabbed a drink for one or two others, and sat outside on the steps for a while. I met some really interesting people from all sorts of backgrounds. Inside the pub, I met a man at the bar while I was waiting, who, if I recall correctly, was 85 years old, having his regular pint with one of his sons. Both him and his sons had all been army men. The older one recounting some fascinating stories of what the world looks like when the shit really hits the fan. It seemed almost fateful to meet him. It was a bit odd. He wasn't part of the UKIP event or anything like that. He was just in his local pub. But he didn't mince his words when telling me his view on the EU situation. I'm not going to show any of it to you, but you can take my word for it. He didn't think that his family's dedication to and sacrifices for this country over many decades were made in order to have us governed in any form by a bunch of unelected bureaucrats in Brussels. Fuck that, was the impression he strongly gave me. Even as I stood listening to his horrific stories about events which protected and in many ways produced the privileged, safe and prosperous society I'm fortunate enough to live in now, I kept hearing that saying going through my mind over and over again. The one that goes, hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. Looking at him and then looking around the pub, I couldn't help but feel a chill down my spine as I realised we are almost certainly in the last part of that phrase now. After my fascinating conversation with this old English soldier, I went back outside and had a chat with a few of Carl's team who were watching out for a car which had been circling the pub apparently. The car had actually caught my attention earlier myself when I was sat outside. It had a few Antifa types in it, hoodies up. I guess they were Antifa anyway, they certainly looked it. And it seemed like other people had got some information that it was definitely Antifa, and a local cell had rallied a few troops to get to the pub and cause some trouble once the word had gone round about where UKIP's people were going. They drove past the pub a few times, stopping outside at one point, but I think they decided against doing whatever they had planned. So thankfully that threat came to nothing in the end. But while I chatted to someone on the wall outside the pub, I heard some raised voices behind me, quickly getting louder, and then I saw 3 young men coming up the steps, as well as a younger man I recognised from the quay earlier. Actually, I've only just noticed that I caught these guys on film before they kicked off. Here they are. You'll recognise them in a minute when they've come back down the steps. I didn't spot this until now, but they were obviously inside the pub before coming out to confront or attack someone, as you'll see. I could hear the 3 men shouting, and they struck me as outright leftists, going by their language and shouts of fucking racist and various other words. One of Carl's team was near me, and he'd spotted them too. You might remember that young man who was giving the leftist protesters a good protest of his own back down at the quay. Frankie, I think his name was. he was just arriving at the pub. As he came up the steps, I turned around to see these other three had accosted him and were being extremely aggressive towards him. He looked quite scared. They were screaming in his face, shouting in his face, waving their fists. I was looking over my shoulder to the left, so it doesn't show on the footage, unfortunately, but I could see his face going red from the hand wrapped round his throat of one of them. I saw one of Carl's people intervene, just pulling the guy's hand off Frankie's neck. Bear in mind, nobody knew what was going on, or who these people were at this point. It just looked like three fairly well-built men attacking one fairly nervous and gay-looking man. I stood up as it was getting quite heated, and I saw the man who had his hand round Frankie's neck was now turning on the man from Cole's team who'd intervened. He saw the concrete steps behind his new target and pushed him deliberately, causing him to fall over backwards, at which point I ran behind him just in time to hear him say, "I'm going to fucking do you," or something like that. And back came his right arm with a fist ready to start laying into him. So I sort of jumped on his back or grabbed him round the neck from behind, which actually broke my camera, well, the microphone in it anyway. He was still flailing around while I was holding him, and his mates were diving towards me from my right-hand side, so I just turned, holding him between me and them, and didn't basically want to let go of him until he'd slowed down a bit, because he was going to turn around and belt me one, so I squeezed a bit harder, and he stopped struggling quite so hard, and then I let go. He whipped round, turned on me, and then looked like he was about to start laying into me, but for whatever reason he decided against that. He did lunge at me a few times, so I pushed him away firmly, just once, with one hand, and that was the entire physical stuff over with. The usual gobby crap ensued, as it always does. I checked Carl's man was okay. He had actually hurt his back in the fall, and also had his clothes ripped, but other than that he was okay. Apparently it was all over a flag Frankie was carrying, Kekistan or something. I don't know anything about this, but I've heard the word mentioned as a meme or something since. I certainly had no clue what it was then. I didn't care much about it either. I just wasn't about to watch someone get assaulted, especially one of Carl's team, who'd been on his feet all day and had only intervened to help a lone gay male from being assaulted by 3 other males.
Get out! You're attacking me! Get out! Face! Get out!
I'll do you too, cunt!
You fucking pussy cunt.
What, you gonna hit me now? I'm not gonna hit you. I'm not gonna hit you. Get the fucking back.
And that's when my microphone decided to pack up work for the day. I don't think there's a lot to be said about this incident, really. It speaks for itself in many ways, but there are a couple of brief points, 3 actually. Firstly, there's a few articles online, I was told about this and I looked them up. Devon Live did one, there was a few, but basically they're all sort of saying the same thing. Brawl involving UKIP supporters outside Wetherspoon pub in Exeter and that type of thing. The usual Tommy Robinson style biased media reporting. As I hope is now perfectly clear from this footage, a UKIP supporter was attacked in the street by several leftist thugs. He was defended by 1 or 2 people and there were no punches thrown, no fights, as the reports seem to say. The entire thing consisted of 1 headlock by me and a sharp shove I gave Mr. almost wearing a MAGA hat there. Secondly, and again this is a feature of the left, no matter where they go by all accounts, how quick they turn from bully to victim. And back again maybe. Notice how aggressive this man was when he had the upper hand. He was all out aggression. I'm going to win. I'm going to do you. And he was going to do him. His fist was raised up and just about to come down to pound him in the fucking face. The man he pushed on the floor. Oh, and of course before that he was throttling Frankie and dishing out violent threats to beat him up. But the second he had a taste of losing, even if only for a second or two, just as that oxygen flow to his brain slowed down a bit and made him a bit woozy and his legs go a bit weak, he pops up and instantly fires out the phrase, "What, you gonna hit me now?"
You fucking pussy cunt.
What, you gonna hit me now?
There's just no in between with these fucking people. If they have the upper hand, they'll beat the living shit out of anyone who gets in their way. True Stalin fucking style, of course. But when they lose the upper hand, instead of taking it like a man, in the old-fashioned sense, not the modern one, they become the poor victim and start crying rape for anyone who might overhear. Thirdly, and it's the last point worth mentioning, maybe a positive sign could be seen here. As soon as they didn't have that upper hand anymore, as soon as they felt overpowered or outgunned, the talking started. There was actually quite a long conversation between everyone after this, and a lot more inside the pub afterwards as well. And believe it or not, it was all sorted out much more maturely and in a very civilised way compared to what took place outside. Everyone ended up not necessarily friends, but very civil, having a drink and a chat. It ended well after this silly little violent outburst by them. So they can talk sometimes, it seems, but seemingly only when they no longer feel that physical violence is going to win the day for them. Which goes back to my point that I keep saying, if the police nip this stuff in the bud, not necessarily this, but at these events when the Milkshake artists come out, if they were treating it seriously, I know it's only a milkshake. You don't know that till you find out later it was a milkshake. In the split second that it happens, you haven't got a fucking clue what it was. But if the police treated it like what it could seriously lead to, as in it's a breakdown from discussion, it's a shift from discussion to physical violence. It's that Rubicon being crossed. It's that massive change from talking to violence to physical assaults on people. If they took that seriously and nipped this stuff in the bud, I think there would be a lot more talking going on, because they'd have to be, because they couldn't just turn up a milkshake and humiliate someone and ruin their jacket and run off and laugh about it and get all the credit on fucking Twitter and all the fucking talking heads on the media talking about how it's a new form of protest. If people took it seriously, they'd have to take it seriously, they'd have to stop doing it, and they might then start talking. These guys weren't... I find it hard to say after just watching this fucking video again and the way they behaved, but the truth is they were okay. They were quite civil. And then they said, look, we were just fucking pissed off he's doing this, and we were told this is a racist Nazi flag, and so they basically saw Frankie as a fucking neo-Nazi, a real one, a real live, living and breathing fucking Hitler supporter in their streets. Still doesn't justify doing what they did, because Frankie hasn't done any violence, but it made it a lot easier to understand why they reacted like that. Again, didn't justify it, but it made it easier to understand, and it then gave us the opportunity to say, no, that's not what he's not a fucking Nazi, you dickhead. Where'd you hear that? Oh, I heard it from so-and-so. And anyway, the talking worked, but the talking only came after they tried violence and fucking lost. And that's the key thing to take away from this, I think. Stand up to these people. If they want to run away afterwards, fine. But if they want to stick around, then they'll have to talk, because they know their fists ain't going to win the fucking day. After the event, everything was very pleasant and peaceful again. I had a few more drinks, non-alcoholic drinks, and then headed home. That was the last event I attended, and I doubt I will get time off work to go to any more unless there's one up near me in the far north sometime. But on my very long journey home through the night, I played over the day's events in my mind, and in particular Joel Pamwani's behaviour and that scuffle outside the pub later. The left really seems to have a very real and increasing difficulty in distinguishing between civilised and lawful behaviour and illegal violence. I am extremely concerned with where this will lead, because unless people start talking to each other more instead of less, both sides just end up in bigger and bigger echo chambers where nobody really challenges their own viewpoint on either side. And this can only possibly be counterproductive. It can't possibly be good. You don't progress when you're not challenged. It's a bit like the spoiled brat syndrome. When you see a child who's given absolutely everything he wants by his parents, it's referred to as being spoiled. This isn't a comment on how much stuff he's given, even though it's often used like that. It's more a comment on the effect that being given all that stuff unconditionally has on his character. It spoils it. It ruins him. It makes him a worse person. I think the same is true of ideology, but in a much more serious way. The less critical analysis someone does about their own views and beliefs, the smaller they become intellectually. They become lazy and eventually just dogmatic, where any challenge to their belief is deemed an offence, rather than the constructive thing it really is. At the end of the day, if you challenge your own beliefs and you challenge them hard, you analyse them hard, introspectively, and you win out, you're stronger in your belief. You can be even more strong in what you believe in because you've actually let it stand the test. You've exercised it like going down the gym. You've put it through its paces and it held up. It's stronger. You're stronger for it. I do think we have a very biased policing system now, increasingly so. And this, combined with the massively biased mainstream media, is what is leading, I think, these leftists to becoming more violent. They're just not used to having to defend their viewpoint or even have them questioned. Certainly not used to challenging other people's views with words because they don't need to anymore. And when the police behave so impotently or worse, deliberately unfairly, it just adds fuel to the fire and it helps these dogmatic people feel ever more justified in breaking the law and assaulting people who they disagree with. I don't think all leftists are bad people. Far from it. I think most of them are not bad people at all. I just think they are led by very, very bad people and encouraged to behave in ways which, without that bad guidance, they would probably never dream of doing. I think most people, regardless of which side they're on, actually have pretty good motives and genuinely think they're trying to make the world a better place. And history is peppered with liberals and leftists who have made the world a better place. We do need the left. Not necessarily the radical left, just like we don't need the radical right. But we do need the left. As I've said several times, they are as essential as the right. And I mean conservatives, not Nazis. It's just that both sides are needed in various amounts at different times, depending on the situation. The left has had its way with the country and, in fact, the entire Western world since around the mid-50s, definitely since the 60s. So they have had over half a century of growing power and impact on society and culture, and for a long while they may have done many good things, but nothing is perfect and nobody is perfect, and the more power they accumulate, the more this becomes an ideological power struggle than anything else, certainly than what it was originally. And they are now in power, and they won't let anything threaten that power, and that's what this is now all about today. Power. Once upon a time it was about change. It was, I believe that. It was about social justice at one time. It was about fairness and equal rights at one time. But it's a fucking long time since those things were achieved, and the pendulum has now swung too far, and it is now creating inequality. People get jobs based on the colour of their skin, or their sexual identity, or their political opinions, or their gender, and we seem to have lost the idea of competence actually being the most important thing of all. Was there a time when the most competent person for a job didn't get it because of their race or gender? Yes, there was such a time. Long, long time ago. Nobody sensible would deny that. It did happen. So along came the left to put that injustice right, and they did so. And then came things like affirmative action in the US, which is just as much present here. It's just not written down as a policy unless you work at the BBC, but it's an unwritten rule every bit as strong as the rules laid down in law in the USA, enabling people to be chosen for jobs based on the colour of their skin. This is now state-sponsored racism, where the race or gender of a person is more important than their abilities. And that, I'm sorry to say, is a road to fucking hell, and complete social breakdown, and economic breakdown, and educational breakdown, and so on. Imagine you were going for a surgery to have a brain tumour removed or something. You've got the choice of a surgeon who is the leader in his or her field, the most respected, accomplished brain surgeon on the planet. And in the next room, you've got another surgeon you can choose for your life-saving operation, and that surgeon is someone who was chosen because of things which have nothing to do with how good they are at their job. It's blatantly obvious which one anyone would choose, given that choice, assuming that person cared about living. But this is where it gets much more complex and troublesome, because I believe this affirmative action type of so-called positive discrimination, i.e. if we do it, it's positive, if you do it, it's negative, wrong, illegal and racist, this causes racism where none may have existed before. I think so anyway. And here's why. Now imagine that your choices of brain surgeon are between a white man and a black woman. You know nothing else about them. You just see a white man in one chair and a black woman in the other, and you can pick which surgeon you have to go inside your head. Whilst you may have zero prejudice whatsoever about her race or her gender, you might even be a black woman yourself. But it doesn't take many years of affirmative action and so-called positive discrimination before you, or any sensible person, will actually choose the white man, purely because you're suspicious, and reasonably so too, that the other one is there only because of her race or her gender, or both. After all, we know the white man won't be getting the job for any reason other than his competence, not in this modern social political culture anyway. But you also know the other one might only have the job because of her gender or race, or more likely in reality a combination of competence and leftist bingo points, but not just competence. So that introduces a risk to you. So surely the rational and logical decision is to always choose the white man in that scenario, and avoid the non-white one. I know how that sounds, and I can imagine people screaming and wetting themselves about it, but I'm just presenting the reality we're now living in, and where it logically takes the average thinking person. I have seen this in countless environments and industries, and in countless Western countries, especially the UK and the US. So much so, in fact, that I actually wonder if there is some, and I just say wonder, if there's some very deep and convoluted conspiracy to cause more racism for some reason, a kind of divide and rule weapon used against the population to keep it so divided that nobody feels safe and everyone is just happy to hand more and more power to the nanny state, or even those who conspire at a higher level than the government, the real global kings of political and racial supremacy. Like I said, the pendulum has swung too far, far too far, and it needs to swing back to a place where common sense actually means something again, and true equality in the hierarchy of competence is the ultimate goal again. When we had that goal, Western nations just fucking shot for the stars. I mean, the speed of the Industrial Revolution, the medical progress, technological progress, when there wasn't this, what colour are they first? When it was just, who's the best programmer? Who's the best? I mean, I was reading a book called Code Warriors about the NSA and cryptography and the Second World War mainly, and the Enigma machine and all that sort of stuff. And it was absolutely fascinating. They overcame one of the biggest problems they ever faced and managed to crack this in the Cold War. This was the Russian cryptography, which led us to finding, I think, the spies who stole the atomic secrets. It was just a fascinating read, but that you hear of that sort of immense progress. I mean, computers were born out of that need to increase the ability to decrypt cryptographic messages, to do the calculations required when there were millions and millions of possibles. And all of that came from a competence hierarchy. All of that came out of a need to progress for survival, and where there was no fucking place for choosing someone based on what dress they're wearing or how they identify or whether they walk with a funny fucking limp. It was, can you fucking do the job, and are you the best? And if you're the best at the job, I don't give a fuck what you look like, because we need the best, because we've got to win this. And that was when progress was at the rate of progress was at its highest. And we've just sort of hit a peak and then just got into this leftist shit, and it's all just started to go downhill. I think I mentioned earlier how someone I know went for a job interview with the fire service and was told after the interview that despite him being absolutely perfect for the job, that's a quote, the political quota placed on the man interviewing him dictated that he couldn't give him the job due to his race, gender and sexual identity. He failed on all three. As he was told, if he had just gone in there as a white man, but one who claimed to be transgender, just that one, he would have got the fucking job, because it would have ticked one of these quota boxes. Now, as ridiculous and criminally fucking insane and unfair as that may be, the point I'm actually interested in is how that changed this man. Who the hell wouldn't be changed by such an experience? How about after 3 or more similar experiences for jobs in completely different roles, different sectors? Because that's what happened. So he leaves that interview, and as he goes out the door, he sees other candidates for the same job interview waiting in line, sat on the chairs. And he knows that while they're waiting for their interviews for that same job that he was told he was perfect for but can't have, he knows that there are people in those seats that are going to get that job. And he sees, I don't know, a gay man, a transgender, a brown man, whatever, But he sees one of the things he's just been told he's going to get the job just based on that attribute. Nothing to do with competence. Does he have a right to feel hard done by? If not, did Rosa Parks have a right to feel hard done by? Who in their right mind is not going to feel some resentment? When they're walking past the transgender or the black candidate sitting in the queue, knowing, because he sees there's one black candidate in the queue and all the others are white, he's just been told before he left, that black one's going to get it. Because of that black thing. Not because of anything else. And yet he knows he's probably less suited to the role because he's just been told he's perfect. And on paper he's by far the best candidate, but he's got the wrong skin. It isn't racist to feel hard done by. It is right to feel hard done by when you have been hard done by. Your competence was worth nothing. Your immutable characteristics let you down. Things you can't change, just like the black man who doesn't get the job because the employer doesn't like black people. What the fuck is the difference? Okay, the shoe's on the other foot, but it's the same principle. It's exactly the same discrimination. And this is everywhere these days. And people seriously wonder why more and more people are supporting what people like Carl and Milo and Tommy are saying. They're supporting them because they're telling the fucking story of people's lives in 2019. They're telling the truth. The reality under which more and more people have to suffer due to state-sanctioned prejudice and unfair discrimination. Nobody likes discrimination. It doesn't matter what colour you are or gender or anything else. No one likes to be unfairly discriminated against. Everyone gets discriminated against for fairly, as in the best person for the job gets it. Everyone else was discriminated against for not being as good at the job. But that's what we, many years ago, worked out was a fair way to discriminate. But picking them based on how they look, that's not very fair. And it doesn't take society forward, it takes it backwards. I know a police officer, ex-police officer, who once actually said these very words to me. If I see an inspector or chief inspector and it's a black woman, I straight away have less respect for them, because it's extremely likely that the main reason they get that job is because of positive discrimination, which means they are probably not the best person for the job and someone better than them missed out on it despite being better qualified and maybe worked harder for it. How resentful would you feel to give a decade or two of your life to a job or a career in the hope of moving up the pay scale, moving up the ranks, moving up the positions, whatever it is, only to find that each time a promotion comes along, you know your chances are already hugely diminished because, if you've got any chances at all that is, because of the colour of your skin or the fact you're heterosexual or whatever. It's creating resentment in people who otherwise beforehand were not resentful. That can't be good. And I think it takes a very smart and extremely strong person who does a lot of introspective thinking to resist feeling resentful towards non-white people, for instance, when living that experience for years on end. Having said that, it's crucial that they don't become resentful of, at least of those people, of, say, non-white people, because they are not the ones who are to blame. They didn't create this. They're just the beneficiaries at the moment of this corrupt and unfair system, having once been the ones who lost out to another unfair system which tilted the other way. This system, just like the last one, was created predominantly by white people. And it's those white, wealthy, elitist leftists who deserve all the resentment and need to be removed from the seats of power before this divide and rule, race-baiting, hateful, anti-male culture crap starts to recede and we can get anywhere near some common sense again. We are going downhill. The minute you see something like race as more important than competence, whether you're on the right or the left, it all starts going downhill very quickly. And it's been going downhill for a good few decades now. Hence why we are at such a low point now, and why the true human rights activists of our time are not Rosa Parks or Martin Luther King or Cesar Chavez, but people like Carl Benjamin and Tommy Robinson. By calling them racist or whatever else, all that we do is stave off the inevitable point in time when the entire country will have to sit down and think about what they're actually saying. Not responding with name-calling and insults or assaults, but with humility and attentiveness. That doesn't mean you have to agree with a single word they say. It's a risk of listening, though. But without listening and considering their points honestly and intelligently, how will you ever know if you do or not? Maybe that's just too risky. After all, these people decide their position based on how they want to appear to the world around them. these virtue signallers, rather than what they actually believe. That's of lesser importance than how I'm seen. So maybe the risk of debating is that they might lose. And if you lose an argument, if you lose a very vigorous argument at least, where you get to put all your best points across and you still categorically, flatly lose, then it's kind of traditional to change your viewpoint, or at least adjust it slightly. For most leftists, listening, never mind debating, is out of the fucking question. You heard it yourself at all these debates. Don't engage, don't let them draw you in. Well, it shouldn't be out of the question. That is a closed mind who thinks that way. And I truly believe that the idea of having an open mind is just too scary to many of these people. And that is what ideological possession does to you.
Shut the fuck up for the 50th billionth time if you'd fucking listen.
For example, yeah.
The MRA group. Can you shut the fuck up for a second too? I'm reading, fuckface. The fact that women have long been shut out of dangerous industrial jobs by men, by the way, is part of patriarchy.
One of them later regrets says
the idea that women are too weak to fight or too delicate to function in a military setting is part of patriarchy. It's part of patriarchy. Part of patriarchy. I don't know if you're noticing a theme. Patriarchy. Anyways, I'm not done. Not done. Shut the fuck up. Feminists do not want you. Shut the fuck up. Let me finish my list. Patriarchy. 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 Fuckface. Mr. Entitled. Mr. Ego. Patriarchy. Fuckface.
I think I've already used the phrase odious creature, in which case, sorry, I misspoke. Even you are not deserving of that title, not as long as this self-obsessed, over-entitled, arrogant and hateful wannabe dictator is still walking the earth. Her insults and vitriol just rolls so naturally off the tongue every time her mouth opens, and so ferociously, and combined with those vicious looks, those daggers showing her unreserved, passionate hatred of just about everyone, it's abundantly clear that she has zero respect for other people, and I dare say that applies even to those on her own side. In fact, I've seen clips of her where her own supporters tried to just sneak a word in edgeways with their opinion, and she just gave them a dagger too. Shut the fuck up. I'm here, I'm speaking. She is the epitome of arrogance and ego, and yet she had the nerve to say Mr. Entitled, Mr. fucking Ego to him. The most meek and mild man stood silently absorbing her shit. She doesn't know what fucking planet she's on. When things get as bad as this, when someone has dehumanised and vilified their ideological opponents to this extent, sadly, I think it's just a matter of time before violence breaks out. Listening to a different point of view, especially one which is extremely challenging to hear, let alone consider with genuine curiosity or discuss in any rational way, this takes sincere intellectual honesty and humility, and no shortage of courage either. Over the years, I've seen some interesting debates, and I'm always drawn to the ones where, well, they're quite rare, but occasionally you'll find one where both sides are strongly opposed to one another, but they both somehow manage to sit and behave respectfully while hearing things which actually repulse them, or go against every single foundational belief they've ever had. The debate between Jordan Peterson and Slavoj Žižek was one of those I'll never forget, especially given the amazing amount of common ground which was found between them, and how much genuine accidental agreement they had. By sitting down and not just speaking to each other, but far more importantly, listening to each other, and affording each other the respect and the presumption of good intent as well, rather than the modern approach to assume the opponent is the devil incarnate, it was fascinating to me how much they seemed to accidentally discover common ground, like they were both more surprised even than me watching. That was one hell of a discussion, and hopefully a lesson to many people on both sides of the wall. But of all the challenging and interesting conversations I've ever heard, there's one which comes straight to mind, as I've never ceased to be fascinated by it, especially by how it demonstrates the hypocrisy of the left nowadays. This interview took place in 1971, just shy of half a century ago, between Muhammad Ali and Michael Parkinson. What I find most interesting about it is how the things Ali said are so unpopular, unfashionable, and so evil, according to most modern ways of thinking. Yet I had never heard a single mention of it anywhere. until I just accidentally came across it one day when researching the history of the BBC, I think it was. I had to watch it twice in a row just to confirm that my ears weren't deceiving me. I had no idea Muhammad Ali had ever remotely expressed any views like this. I watched loads of documentaries on Muhammad Ali. I'd never heard any mention of this anywhere. Rather than try to describe it, I'll just let you watch it for yourself. Sorry if you've seen it before, but most people I know had never heard of it, like me, let alone seen it.
Black people must do something for themselves and not always beg white people to move in the neighborhoods, but clean their own neighborhoods. And another thing, when you say integration, it comes under intermarriage too, right? All being together.
Right, sure.
And I'm sure no intelligent white person watching this show, or no intelligent white man in his or her right white mind, want black boys and black girls marrying their white sons and daughters, and in return introducing their grandchildren as half-brown, kinky-haired black people.
I wouldn't object to that.
Well, you wouldn't, but a lot of them would.
Well, I'm sure a lot of people. No, this is the point.
What I'm trying to say is this. You don't have it. You say you don't, but you don't have it. You really ain't gonna have it. You're on the show, and you got to say that. But
that's not true.
Why would you want to do that?
Because I don't think I'm any different from you. You see.
We much different.
I mean, I think society's made us different.
You know we're different. And we all together.
But society's made us different.
No, not society. God made us different.
No, we're just human beings. He made all of us.
We all, listen, bluebirds fly with bluebirds, red birds want to be with red birds. Listen, tell me when I'm wrong. Pigeons want to be with pigeons.
But
tell me when I'm wrong. We should have more, they don't have intelligence, but yet they stay together. We should have more intelligence than them, right? Buzzards are with buzzards. Buzzards are with buzzards. Bluebirds are with bluebirds. They all are birds, but they've got different cultures. The eagles like to hang out in the mountains. The buzzard like to fly around the desert.
Well,
the bluebird like to fly around the trees and the grass.
There'd be certain problems a buzzard mating with a sparrow, wouldn't there?
What?
There'd be certain.
Right. We have the problems too.
No,
I don't see no black and white couples in England or America walking around proud, holding their children.
That's because society...
And going out.
That's society's fault. I mean, we've got to educate people around it.
Well, life is too short for me to be raised catching hell for something like that. I'd rather go and be my own. I have a beautiful daughter, beautiful wife. They look like me. We're all happy, and I don't have no trouble. I have no trouble. I ain't that much in love with no woman to go through all that hell. Ain't no one woman that good. You understand?
I understand. Yeah, I do understand. I understand. I think it's sad that
it ain't sad because I want my child to look like me. Every intelligent person wants his child to look like him. I'm sad because I want to blot out my race and lose my beautiful identity. Chinese love Chinese. They love the little slanted-eyed, pretty brown-skinned babies. Pakistanis love their culture. Jewish people love their culture. A lot of Catholics don't want to marry a number of Catholics. They want the religion to stay the same. Who want to spot up yourself and kill your race? You a hater of your people if you don't want to stay who you are. You shame what God made you. God didn't make no mistake when he made us all like we were.
I think that's a philosophy of despair.
Despair.
I really do.
It ain't no despair. Number one, can't no woman. Let me tell you something. I want to tell you. Listen, no woman on this whole earth, not even a black woman in Muslim countries, can please me and cook for me and socialize and talk to me like my American black woman. No woman, at last, is a white woman, can really identify with me and my feelings and the way I act and the way I talk. See? And you can't take no Chinese man and give him no Puerto Rican woman and holler about we're in love and you emotionally in love and physically, but really they're not happy because she's going to hear some Puerto Rican music, he's going to hear some Chinese music. And they're going to be clashing all the time. It's just nature. You can do what you want, but it's nature to want to be with your own. I want to be with my own. I love my people. That's all. I don't hate nobody.
What a horrible position to be in, to be faced with someone saying things which your value system and your employer deems disgustingly racist and morally reprehensible, yet someone who is an ethnic minority and grew up during segregation. He believes interracial marriage is a direct threat to his race and his culture. You heard it yourself. Funny, I think David Duke has said similar things. Why is only one of them labelled a far-right complete and utter Nazi? Why isn't Muhammad Ali described on Wikipedia, first line, white supremacist, or black supremacist for that matter? Once again, you can tell how corrupt and dysfunctional a belief system is when it treats people so different for saying the very same words or opinions. Muslims can protest against LGBT stuff in schools. They're standing up for their religious and cultural heritage. Christians do it, or non-Christian whites, and they are evil white transphobes who need wiping out. Women can set up organisations just for women, but if men do the same thing, they're misogynistic bigots and rife with gender stereotypes. Black Caribbean culture can be hugely celebrated with enormous street parties in Notting Hill every year, the biggest festival in Europe. But if anyone flies the flag of the country that hosts this huge spectacle celebrating Caribbean culture, that is deemed a symbol of racism. No, not a street party celebrating English culture, just a flag. A whole month dedicated to black history. That's around 8% of the entire year. But watching a football match for 90 minutes with your own nation's flag on display, that's antagonistic and imperialist. Gypsies, Sikhs, Hindus can have arranged marriages, but if a white person does it, or if a white person so much as wants their children to marry someone of the opposite sex, they're already pushing their children into gender stereotypes and automatically sent to the gulags. The left is simply one big lorry load of outright hypocrisy. It doesn't matter where you look or how often you look, it's just constantly on display for anyone anywhere near open-minded enough to simply glance at it with a critical eye, just for a second. I want to finish by addressing those who I genuinely believe are pushing our country to complete destruction. And with the biased police and government, they're doing it faster and faster now. The radical, rabid, Antifa-type leftists. If you are one of these radical left-wingers and currently enjoy your obvious immunity under this heavily biased semi-police state, try just for a minute to think how you'd feel if you were punched or covered in milkshake while you danced with other lefties at a gay pride march, only to watch the police standing with their arms folded, looking the other way and claiming they didn't see or hear anything when you know damn well that they did. I wonder how you'd feel suffering such an injustice. Maybe then you would have some real persecution to complain about, and then you wouldn't need to fabricate a new reason to call yourself a victim of some invisible institutionalised somethingism every other friggin' Tuesday. You know as well as I do that if the shoe was on the other foot, you would expect and demand that your assailant was arrested and charged with his unprovoked physical attack on you. Now, I know what a lot of leftists would say to that. I know firsthand because they screamed it in my face in some cases. Nazis don't deserve respect. Nazis don't deserve protection from harassment and violence. All that stuff's for everybody else, just not these evil Nazis. But here's the problem with that, as if you didn't know. There's no definition of a Nazi that you can just do a straw poll on the street and decide someone is like a pH test. That one's a Nazi, that one isn't. But oh yeah, that one is. And the reason you can't do that is because unless someone is a member of the Nazi party and stands there and says, I am a Nazi, you have to assume they're not. If it walks like a duck and shits like a duck and fucking quacks like a duck, then it's a duck. But if it doesn't, then it probably isn't. And you certainly haven't got a reasonable grounds to assume that it is a duck. And that's why you play this game. Because if you can just call something a duck and think, I fancy duck for dinner, that thing's fucked, whatever it is. Even if it's a frog, it's going to die like a duck because you called it one. That's not how the law works. And that's not how any civilized society works. You don't get to remove someone from the pool of rights that is bestowed on everyone from purely saying one word out of your mouth, because that gives you all of the power over everybody else. That's what you call tyranny. And that's why I keep calling you little fuckers tyrants. Maybe not all of you are deserving of that term, because the term requires you to know what you're doing. To be tyrannical, you have to know what you're doing. And I don't actually think all of you do. I think a lot of you are complete morons. But definitely some of you, the ringleaders, the Marxists, the proper professors that go out there and rally up the students to go and do some protest in the high street about how bad petrol is while they all drove to the fucking event. Those people do know what they're doing. They've got brains, they know what they're doing, and they're tyrants, because they are slowly but surely shifting the goalposts so that all of the things that this country has fought for, all of the rights that people have that were earned through blood, they apply to everyone but who? The opponents of you. How convenient is that? It's a bit like getting out a gun and just shooting everyone you disagree with. You might as well, because if you can silence them, if you can attack them in the street under the noses of the police, and the police grin along with you and give you a little wink and a nudge and a little chuckle, that's all right, mate, yeah, that's fine, because we know they're Nazis, because you said they were, so they must be. Can you not, just for a minute, think how dangerous that is? Yeah, I'm sure you will laugh while you're not on the receiving end of it. You enjoy every minute of it, and you even capitalise on it, despite probably being anti-capitalist. But things tend to go in cycles, and tomorrow it just might be your turn. The permanent solution is to stand firm on the principles of equality for all under the law, something which you like to pretend you believe in, while your actions prove otherwise, obviously. And it's a progressive principle which was established by, believe it or not, traditional English liberals, very much like Carl Benjamin. The irony is just, it's so thick, you'd add some raspberry flavouring and throw it at the nearest white man who doesn't feel ashamed of himself for his immutable biological characteristics. Since Mummy probably didn't explain this to you before you were old enough to join Antifa, here's a pretty good guiding principle for life, I think. You shouldn't physically attack someone for uttering words that you don't like to hear or don't agree with. If it's easier to remember, it's got a better ring to it, you can shorten that a little bit to don't be a fucking fascist. The way to fight words that you believe are wrong is to fire back with better words. As you know, your opponents often say that the reason you leftists don't do that is because you don't have any arguments. It must be an annoying thing to keep hearing, but you can stand up to it. You can prove them wrong. And I'd love to see you do it, actually, if you can, because if you could show that you actually do have arguments which can stand up to a bit of scrutiny, then we'll actually get some real progress. As in, not the changes you want to put through by force, but changes that you'll negotiate into action. And those changes tend to stick around a long, long, long time. You win a discussion with your mouth, not your milkshakes or your fists. Currently, with your radical, violent tactics, you're just proving your opponents right over and over and over again. Oh, and by the way, if you really believe violence will win this for you, I think you need to wake up and have a look who your opponents are. Just because they haven't spoon-fed you a taste of your own medicine yet, it'd be foolish to think they never will. The working men and women who keep this nation running while you sit on your Xboxes and Facebook anti-everything groups, these people are easygoing for the most part. They've been passive, they don't want to cause any trouble, they want to abide by the law, they want to keep their jobs. They're pretty upstanding people, across the board, generally. But they're only going to take so much of this. And when they finally decide they've had enough, you will unfortunately realise that you've started something you cannot finish. Not with all the milkshakes in the world. So take it steady. Think a bit more carefully about where this road you are paving might lead. It's not going anywhere good. This country has been to war many, many times. Far too many times in my view. And except for the 2 world wars, it's arguable that none of those wars were fought for the actual defence and preservation of our country's existence, our culture, our freedoms, and our right to exist in the world as a nation with its own laws, people, heritage, beliefs and values. The things which made it one of the most attractive countries to migrate to for untold millions around the world. The things which make this place England. The things which I fear will one day be instrumental in saving it from the untold number of attempts to destroy it from within, by converting it to something it never was and was never meant to be. How many lives have been given up so selflessly, so courageously and so brutally in order to allow us to sit and even contemplate these issues today? Those lives were laid down in their millions so that we could just be here today, speaking English instead of German or Russian or French or any other language. These lives were also laid down so that we could avoid the absolutely incomprehensible evils of communism. Having said all that, if we had to give up much of our history and even most of our values and beliefs, if there was just one thing I would save, if I had the power to save just one fundamental founding principle of our society, I would not hesitate to choose freedom of speech. Because from that one freedom, all others were born. And when all others are potentially taken away, that one freedom can reincarnate them from the ashes. So long as people continue to talk to each other instead of silencing different opinions, we will always have some hope of surviving. But one thing which is rarely mentioned, but comes joined at the hip with freedom of speech as far as I'm concerned, is the need to listen to those when they are speaking. If we can all just commit to abiding by that most basic of civilised rules, then no matter how polarised and heated things become, there will always be a chance of avoiding violence and bloodshed, let alone losing our nation. I know some debates are extremely difficult, but if you can't handle a debate, if you can't handle a conversation about a topic which challenges you, then you can't handle freedom. And that makes you far and away the greatest threat to the safety, sovereignty and survival of this country.
A word before rationing begins. The best way you can help is by rationing yourselves. I'm sure that all of you will buy your fair share and no more.